Thank you all for joining us. The Columbian is pleased to welcome candidate for Secretary of State, Julie Anderson. I'm Greg Jane. I'm the editorial page editor at the Columbian, and I'll let the other editorial board members introduce themselves. Craig?
I'm Craig Brown. I'm the editor of the Columbian and a member of the editorial board.
And hello, I'm Colleen Keller. I'm the assistant news editor of the Columbian and also a member of the editorial board.
And we do have a reporter sitting in on this meeting. She won't be asking questions in this forum, but may want to speak with you later and may be writing a story about this. I also should mention that last week, the editorial board interviewed Secretary of State Steve Hobbs, who is running for election for this position. We will post his interview on the internet on our website and our YouTube channel. We also will post this interview unedited in both cases for the benefit of the community. As mentioned, we are recording this already. Let's see, and I think that's the housekeeping. So Julie, why don't you take 1 to 2 minutes, introduce yourself, explain why you are running, and then we'll move on to specific policy questions.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Julie Anderson. I am the nonpartisan candidate who is running for Secretary of State. I'm the candidate that has nearly 13 years of professional experience, having conducted hundreds of elections, recorded millions of documents and preserved them and made them accessible to the public, and also licensed businesses. I do that in my capacity as Pierce County Auditor. I've been re-elected by overwhelming margins 3 times in a row by the residents of Pierce County. And I have a national and state certifications in election administration. And I'm also a state certified public records officer. I am also endorsed and supported by over 40 current and former election administrators in Washington state, and that includes Republicans and Democrats, independents, and nonpartisans. They've put themselves behind my campaign because they know that experience matters, and they've experienced my nonpartisan leadership, and they know that I'll be an effective leader. Prior to being Pierce County Auditor, I had an eclectic career. I served on the Tacoma City Council in a nonpartisan role, and then also worked in the public and nonprofit sectors in human services, criminal justice, and economic development. Not surprisingly, I'm running for Secretary of State because I love this job. I know that I love it because I do it. I'm not dabbling in it. This is something that I do. And finally, I want to improve Washington state's elections with increased security and transparency, but also increasing access to democracy. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Great, thank you, and thanks again for joining us. One of the primary issues surrounding this job is election integrity, election security. Should the people of Washington have faith that our elections are secure?
Absolutely, they should have faith and confidence that our elections are secure. They should also have evidence.
And what kind of evidence what role does the Secretary of State play in bolstering that confidence?
First of all, through communications, but also through taking active steps to increase security and transparency, and doing so without increasing extra drag or cost on voters. And I believe there's ways to do that. On my website, julieanderson.org, when I launched the campaign, I put a lot of detailed policy plans. People can check that out. But here's some really simple steps that we can do. 1, have a statewide risk limiting audit. Right now, we have random batch audits completed in each county, which is basically a comparison of a tabulation count, a machine count, against a paper hand count. Every county chooses their own race to audit, and they are limited by state law in the number of batches that they draw. The number of batches may not be statistically valid, and the races that are chosen in Pierce County versus Cowlitz County may be completely different. I don't want to abandon those batch counts, but I do want to augment them with one unified risk limiting audit. A risk limiting audit is a statistically relevant sample size across all 39 counties on one race. That's one idea that I think would be relatively easy to do.
So would that be, but would it still be conducted at the county level for each county and then they add up the numbers?
That's correct, but under the watchful eye of political party observers in an open public meeting.
And
the Secretary of State's role is aggregating those results and also making sure that the samples are randomized. So the Secretary of State controls the random draw of the ballots, which ballots in which batches. We also are the ones responsible for selecting the p-value, or how statistically deep the sampling needs to be. And then we also would aggregate the findings and perhaps tell counties that they need to go back for additional samples.
What would it take to make that happen? Is that solely up to the Secretary of State? Would that be an act of the legislature, or?
The state legislature has already passed legislation allowing this to happen, but it's a permissive law instead of mandatory. I'm going to, and I believe I can, convince 39 auditors to volunteer to participate in a statewide risk limiting audit. And I hope that we don't need a state law mandating it, but maybe that's something that we'd work for. But right now, we can get a quick start off the blocks without asking for a change in law because the state legislature already allows for it.
Okay, Craig?
Sure. You're running as a nonpartisan. What's the situation in Pierce County? That's a charter county. Is the county auditor a nonpartisan position in Pierce County?
It is. Pierce County is one of 6 counties in Washington state where voters have said that they want their chief elections official to be nonpartisan. That's roughly 56% of the electorate.
Okay, what do you think about extending that to state offices and making the Secretary of State's office a nonpartisan office along with other offices like insurance commissioner or state treasurer? Would you be in favor of that?
Well, I am going to stay agnostic about the treasurer and insurance commissioner, but Secretary of State, you bet. In fact, I've already got the bill drafted. This was one of the last things that Secretary Kim Wyman did in her last legislative session. She introduced such a bill. I would describe it as a courtesy hearing, but I think it's going to be different. When I'm elected as a nonpartisan, that clearly tells the state legislature that voters want this. They want experience, but without party strings attached. So I'll run the bill again, and we'll see what happens.
Okay. Colleen?
In our county, one of the big issues on our November ballot is ranked choice voting. Do you have a position on ranked choice voting, and do you think it would be something that would be feasible on a statewide basis?
I do have a position on ranked choice voting and other electoral reforms, and that can be found on my website, julieanderson.org. I am supporting the local option bill that's been kicking around in the state legislature for about 6 years now, and it gets closer and closer to the finish line every year. The local option is permissive. It simply allows communities to choose to use ranked choice voting if they aren't a first-class city or a charter county. Which is most of the jurisdictions. So I support local option because it's an important feature of Americanism. That's how innovation happens. We wouldn't even be a vote by mail state if we didn't allow for local option. I wouldn't even have voting rights if we didn't allow for local option. It's an important tradition in America. So I support that bill. Is it feasible? It is. It is going to be a challenge, but not an insurmountable challenge. One of the reasons I'm really leaning forward into this issue is we need leadership from the Secretary of State's office. That local option bill leaves unanswered and leaves to the Secretary of State some really important operational considerations, such as how do you conduct a recount for ranked choice voting? How do you determine voter intent? When and how do you release the results and in what sequence, etc. So an experienced election administrator like myself that is trusted by election administrators around the state is needed to usher this in. And I don't think it's a matter of if a matter of if, I think it's a matter of when ranked choice voting comes to Washington state. I do want to be careful though, and I don't want to be misconstrued. I am not advocating for a statewide ranked choice voting system. What I'm advocating for is a serious preparatory effort for local option ranked choice voting.
Now, you said that it would be in counties that are not charter counties. So ours,
Well,
we are a charter county, for instance, passed a home charter measure several years ago.
Yeah.
So how would that work here then, or how would it not work, I guess?
Well, for first-class cities and charter counties, they can, within certain limitations, adopt voting systems like ranked choice voting. So you already have the power to do that, and your voters are going to be weighing in on November. So is San Juan County, and so is King County, the city of Seattle, right? They'll be voting on that as well. The local option bill speaks to the rest of the communities in Washington state that aren't chartered or first class. They're not home rule jurisdictions where the voters want to try this.
Okay, thanks.
And can I say, because we've got so many home rule and first class jurisdictions considering ranked choice voting, that's another reason that I support the local option bill. I would really prefer that we had a standardized ranked choice voting system across the state rather than a variety of jurisdictions doing different things. So I think if the local option bill was passed and we engaged in rulemaking, that jurisdictions like your own, if you choose to do ranked choice voting, would probably adopt rules and adopt methods that are used statewide.
Do you have any concern if we do have some counties, some cities with ranked choice voting, others do not have it? With our, we do have it here on the ballot in November, as you mentioned, and that would lead to different election systems for county council versus state legislature for us locally.
Well, what's your talk? Oh, I'm sorry. Finish your question. Please,
I just can say, do you have any concern that that would add to confusion and that would give an opening to the kind of election deniers that we have seen now and the kind of doubt about the democratic process?
Well, sure. Of course, I'm concerned. What you're talking about is what we call a mixed mode ballot, where you've got a top two primary and then you've got a ranked choice voting primary somewhere in there, right? That means that we're going to have to be very careful with usability testing and the way we design the ballot so that it's not confusing. But don't forget that jurisdictions that opt into ranked choice voting have already done the groundwork with their voters. Voters in one way or another, either through representation or a direct vote, have voted to do this. So it's not being, I think if we were imposing it on jurisdictions that hadn't thought about it, where there wasn't an upswell of grassroots support, then I think we'd be in trouble. I'm pretty confident that we can communicate clearly, especially with enough running time, enough advance time to be able to explain to people and also be able to very transparently show the reallocation of votes whenever candidates reach that threshold. And I've been through quite a few webinars around the United States that have shown jurisdictions that have done this successfully, and there's some really good graphics and tools that make it understandable and explainable.
Colleen, did you have a follow-up on that?
Not on that specifically. I have it on another topic that if I can. On your website, one of your issues also that you mentioned is trying to improve access to democracy. Could you talk a little more specifically about some of the things that you would like to do?
Yes, and thank you for visiting my website. I appreciate that. Access. So Washington State has a great collection of election laws that make it pretty darned easy for the majority of us to participate. And it's hard to think about how to make it easier, which means that the residual gains that we have to make to open it up to more people are going to have to be very creative and require a lot of, I think, technical expertise. I'm talking about, for example, voters who are living with disabilities. When we get our ballot in the mail, it's easy for us to tear open the envelope, to look at it, to follow the instructions, mark it independently, and return it and sign the outer envelope. But if you have limited sight or are completely blind, if you have some sort of a degenerative disease that doesn't allow you to grip, tear, fold, and hold a pen, it's not possible to vote independently and privately. We do have some online marking tools in Washington state where if you've got a computer, you can mark your ballot using your computer and print it out, but you still have to print it out, you still have to fold it, and you still have to sign it. I think that it's not when, or I think it's not if, but when, that we're going to get sued for not having an election modality that allows voters with disabilities to vote independently and privately. There are technology solutions. However, you have to gather together security experts, technologists, end users, advocates, and election administrators to test a responsibly developed digital app. But it's out there. So let's start aiming for it. Let's articulate what we're trying to do, and let's start testing it.
Do you think that requiring, this would obviously would require someone to have computer and internet access? Is that in itself a barrier for some people, though?
It certainly could be, and the technology I'm thinking of is also supported by a mobile phone or a smart app. But you're absolutely right, because voters who are living with disabilities oftentimes, unfortunately, are the poorest among us, where even having a subscription to a smartphone is a barrier, and not having a software system with up-to-date software. Going to a public library is another option. And can I just say right there, I spent a lot of time on just one example of access to democracy. Let me touch on a second example that I have from right here in Pierce County. In Pierce County on election day, I contract with all 3 of my library districts, which means that I have 27 library branches open on election day right up until 8 p.m., allowing voters who have last-minute problems or who forgot to register the opportunity to walk into a safe, familiar, accessible place, verify their voter registration, perhaps get a ballot reissued because their dog ate it or they spilled their coffee on it, vote privately, and put it in a secure drop box. Now, the library staff aren't doing that. They're not election administrators. It's my employees, the certified election administrators behind the scenes, who are doing that work, and qualifying the voter, verifying that they haven't already been registered somewhere, that they're qualified, and that they haven't already been issued a ballot. That has saved in Pierce County our voters an average of 14 miles if they had to have come into a voting center. That's the kind of access that would also open things up to voters who are living with disabilities that maybe don't have a computer at home, but may be very familiar and comfortable in a public library. And it goes without saying that our community members who are experiencing homelessness also appreciate this service. And we do this by expanding access with no degradation in security at all. It's the exact same process, tools, and procedures that we would use at my office, but we've got a library staff acting as a concierge and also printing out that ballot that we send them.
Now, in a case like that, briefly, how do you confirm or ensure that somebody is registered and that they have not received a ballot elsewhere and that they have not already voted?
Sure. So first of all, there's an easier way to do it. And as Secretary of State, I'm going to unlock that capacity with our votewa.gov system. But here's how Pierce County does it. A voter walks in, the library staff ask if they're registered to vote or what they need. They walk them to a computer terminal and have them log in to votewa.gov, where the voter, maybe for the first time, is realizing that they can check their own voter registration record. So it's a learning opportunity. They log in, the library staff with them verify whether they're already registered or not registered. And if they are not registered, the library staff will give them the paper form that we all know and love. The voter will fill it out and sign it. It gets put in the ballot deposit box, the secure box. And But before that happens, the library staff will call the election center and provide the necessary information over the phone. On our end, we call up the election management system, make sure that the voter isn't already registered to vote somewhere, and what their voting history is, ensure that they are indeed over, that that they are the requisite age, that they're not in prison, etc. So everything that we would do for you registering to vote online or in person is happening at that moment in our office. So once we've ascertained that you haven't voted anywhere else in Washington state, and we can do that real time in votewa.gov. That's new since 2019. I'm proud to say that I was on the executive steering committee that built that system, and Pierce County has really helped to make it successful. So we've got real-time visibility from Clallam to Colfax and every corner in between, where we can see by the minute, by the second sometimes, what's happening with voters to ensure that they're not double dipping or trying to cheat the system. Once we've done that voter verification, then we will determine exactly what ballot the voter needs, because we don't just have one ballot, right? We have to report results by precinct. So in Pierce County, for example, I've got 720 different precincts. We're going to make sure what precinct that voter is in, and we're going to send a PDF to a whitelisted address at the library. So we've already ascertained what those internet protocols are and what desktop we're sending it to. And the librarian prints it out and hands it across the desk to the voter. And from there, it's just like you were in your living room.
Now, for a couple of decades now, Washington has had exclusively vote by mail. Some people are challenging that system and claim that it is not as secure as going to a polling place. How do you answer those concerns?
Well, if they want to go back to in-person voting because they miss their neighbors, that makes my heart melt. But there's other ways to get to know your neighbors and build community. I had the privilege of presiding over polling place elections and vote by mail simultaneously when I was first elected. Pierce County was the last county to stop offering polling place voting. And I can tell you that running two systems at the same time is insecure. Standing up polling places and finding the volunteers who are stipended or the employees to staff them and supervising that. And then also having polling, I think people forget that that polling places had machines that actually collected and stored votes. And if you're listening to all the chatter around the United States, a lot of the skepticism is about voting machines that are out in the community that people believe can be hacked. So polling places are not more secure than vote by mail. What is secure is a unified, paper-based, centrally counted, auditable system, which is what we have in Washington state. But I am a big fan for those last-minute emergencies of creating opportunities where vote by mail is just not working for people. And we just spent a lot of time talking about voters living with disabilities or voters who are having last-minute emergencies who might otherwise skip the election if there wasn't an in-person option.
Okay, Craig or Colleen, anything?
Who are some public officials in Washington state that you admire, that you think do a good job?
Officials. I'm a big fan of mayors
Cool.
who,
That's good. Who are some of those?
my own mayor, Victoria Woodards, just about any mayor that's tackling homelessness and chronic street populations with any sense of urgency and effectiveness. Yeah, so I can't name every mayor. Quite a few of them have endorsed me. And you can check out my endorsements online. But I guess what I'm trying to say, I'm not trying to dodge your question, is that I admire elected officials who have the executive responsibility of making government work for citizens and who have to operationalize some really complicated state laws, some of which don't help them do their jobs, some of which do. Mayors and council members, town councils, county councils are the ones that have to make things work on the ground, and they're the government that's closest to the people. So those tend to be the people that I relate to the most because I'm a practitioner.
If a president of the United States called and asked you to find 11,000 votes, what would your response be?
Please hold while I press the record button.
Hopefully that won't happen. I just thought I would ask.
I do want to provide you with a serious response, because in my 13 years running elections in Pierce County, and it's not just elections, right? It's business licensing, it's supervising animal control, recorded documents, vehicle licensing. There will occasionally be people who think that because they have my phone number that they have special access and feel emboldened to ask for favors or for shortcuts. It's always my practice whenever possible to take phone calls that I believe are going to be leading in that direction with another staff person in the room, and to not get caught in those conversations. And of course, the answer is no. The good thing about being a Pierce County auditor and being the Secretary of State is we're ministerial, executive. We are rule bound by most everything that people care about. And if you want a rule follower, you want Julie Anderson.
Now, you touched upon some of the other duties of the office. Obviously, elections get the bulk of the attention. What do you see as the other priorities of the office, and would you make any changes into how the office oversees those?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for paying attention to the other divisions. We run a state library. People are surprised to know that. Also the state archives, the address confidentiality program, and the corporations and charitable filing division. Let me start with the corporations and charitable filing division. Just about, with few exceptions, every legal entity in Washington state needs to register with the Secretary of State. And that division right now is a real mess. And it wouldn't have been that way under my leadership. There were some software changes that needed to be made to accommodate new state rules that the state legislature made. But instead of standing up an alternative online portal for while those changes were being made, the incumbent elected to have people start submitting their annual reports by hand in writing and mailing in checks. That has resulted in an untenable backlog where we have got organizations that are being administratively dissolved, or when people check online, don't exist. It's not a small problem. If you are a nonprofit who is trying to get insurance, you're trying to finance a new building, or goodness sakes, if you are in court defending yourself in a lawsuit, if you don't exist in that registry, you don't exist. And there is one nonprofit owner I know that was in court where a savvy attorney said, you have no standing in this case, and they almost lost their lawsuit because they didn't exist. So that definitely needs more attention, just active management. And it takes, I think, a customer service background like mine to anticipate what the problems of our customers would be. So going to the state archives, I would like to make sure that we're ready for the modern era. Did you know that Washington State was second in the world to launch a digital archive program? True, right behind Germany, but that was decades and decades ago. And the digital archives that they were talking about was converting paper into scanned images. These days, you know that government is creating records at lightning speed in bigger volumes than ever, but in multiple electronic formats. And records are being created that are digitally native. They've never been a piece of paper. I don't think that the state archives is prepared as it needs to be to receive, retain, preserve, richly index, and make accessible to the public these digital format records. Just think of the redistricting that you watched and covered in 2021, and think about the records produced there. Is the record that needs to be preserved the final map that was printed? Or was it all the versions that were interactive, and how are those being stored and recorded? So modernizing archives is going to be important. Archives also has a leadership role to play in supporting local government. As I said, I'm a state certified public records officer, and I can tell you that all of the court cases and financial penalties being imposed on local governments isn't necessarily because the government is malicious or incompetent. It's because they can't find the records. All of this digitally native stuff, all the emails, all the attachments that are being produced, if they don't know how to do document management, storing them, indexing them, being able to retrieve them, then they're not going to be able to respond to a public records request. So I'm going to be the Secretary of State that provides as much training and technical assistance as possible to local governments so they can be more responsive. I have just done a ton of talking. I've only talked about 3 things. I can also, if I've got time, talk about the address confidentiality program. I said that I had a history in nonprofit management. One of the things that I did was run the YWCA of Tacoma Pierce County, serving victims and survivors of domestic violence. We've only got approximately 2,000 enrollees in the address confidentiality program. That's the program that allows crime victims and people under credible threat of violence to be able to participate in public life, register to vote, get married, to be able to do that, but to keep their residential address private. We've only got about 2,000 people. I think that that's really an undercount. So I'm going to work with nonprofit networks and probably through the corporations and charitable filing division that we have to make sure that every nonprofit and every service organization knows that it's available. I will also say I'm very proud that county auditors petitioned the state legislature to expand the address confidentiality program to real property ownership. It used to be, it was just very, very limited, but for domestic violence survivors, they couldn't ever buy a house and build that equity and household wealth to pass on to their children, which just exacerbated the barriers that a victim experiences. Now they're going to be able to purchase real property, and they're going to be able to stay safe using the address confidentiality program. That's going to require a passionate advocate to get the word out and to promote that, and I'm excited to do it. I could keep going.
Well, Craig or Colleen, any other questions?
What you also on your website, you address one of your other issues is wanting to try to improve civics education for the state students. What specifically, again, would you like the legislature to do to improve civics education?
Well, the first thing is I'm going to let the experts lead the way rather than inserting myself into this. There is already a coalition of social studies teachers under OSPI that are tackling this problem and trying to figure out what the most effective curricula and activities are to teach civics to kids. I guess that what I would do is when they're finished with their recommendations, I would ask them, how can the Secretary of State help what you've done? And I would say it's probably marrying community with curriculum. Young people can carry that knowledge home. I would extend it to parents. And to community so that young people are getting a chance to exercise their civic engagement in community. I'm not saying this very well, but can you imagine If young leaders in junior and senior high were able to earn credit or extra credit and could hold a town hall or a community meeting to share what they've learned about local government, state government, and elections with their peers and with their community members. That would be especially helpful with minority populations, maybe that that are maybe new to the United States, maybe they are new Americans, and it would be especially important in small communities that are geographically isolated. So I would like to see what kind of leadership programs kids have and how I can combine that with the civics they're being taught. Colleen, since you're a fan of my website, you probably also noticed the voice program. The voice program is something I'm going to be very excited to launch, but I will need some legislative support for that. And I think they'd be excited about it. VOICE stands for Voter Outreach and Innovative Civic Engagement. And it really mimics what we did very successfully in Pierce County and in Washington State for the 2020 census, where we combined philanthropic dollars with government dollars and then created very low barrier, easy, small granting systems and got local communities to tell us what the most effective outreach methods would be. So just imagine those junior and senior leaders in high school applying for a voice grant and then doing outreach with their community. The results are going to be really different between teenagers at a Grange Hall in Asotin County and young people at a Somali community center in downtown Seattle, right? And I just cannot wait to see what people come up with. But we've got to start using community to connect to community. There is limited utility to having government talk to citizens, even when you pay citizens to do the talking for you, right? I don't think that that's our audience. I think that we've got to have a ground up approach. And again, you can see my human services and community development career shining through.
Julie, we'll move on. Give us your final pitch for why voters should support you. And you already mentioned some endorsements. Feel free to mention any other notable ones.
Well, my closing pitch to the viewers that are watching this are, I hope that you can see my enthusiasm shining through. This is a job that I love to do. I've obviously given a lot of thought to plans and policy proposals. And don't forget that I am trusted by the people who know me the best, professional election administrators from across the state, current and former, Republican, Democratic, and independent and nonpartisan. They've seen my leadership. They have seen me lead groups through untenable times and gnarly problems and keep everybody in the boat at the same time. They know that I'm passionate, honest, transparent, and will move the state forward. Let's see. Don't forget that you want a professional in this job. While my life experience that I've explained is rich and diverse and adds a lot to me, you also want somebody that has had hands-on experience running elections. And I've conducted hundreds of elections here in Washington State, preserved millions of public records and made them accessible to the public, and have experience registering businesses. The Secretary of State is a very high prestige, high status office, but it is a ministerial office. So you need somebody that is going to understand detail, love the law, and be able to simplify it and communicate it to the general public. And that is Julie Anderson. I'm not going to call out in particular any endorsements. I just want you to visit julieanderson.org. I will say that I've got very unsurprising proportions of endorsements. I think last time I checked, I had 47 Democrat, 37 Republican, and more nonpartisan. But Secretary Sam Reed has endorsed me. He knows me. He's worked with me. Secretary Kim Wyman is unable to make an endorsement in this race, but I can tell you that she encouraged me to run, and I was her top recommendation to the governor in the appointment process.
Great. Well, thank you. And before we let you go, I should mention again, we met with Steve Hobbs last week. That video will also be available on our website. Julie, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.